Welcome to ePathshala. I am Dr. Vishal Jadhav, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidya-mitra, Pune. Today we are going to look at a module called Feminism and Classical Sociology, which comes under the paper Classical Social Theory. Until now, in this particular paper of Classical Social Theory, we have looked at how classical sociology emerged right from positivism of Auguste Comte to that of Karl Marx, Weber and Durkheim. In all these discussions, the issue revolved around how society changed from the earlier feudal system to that of the modern system. Marx, Weber and Durkheim, of course, are talking about modernity, capitalism, bureaucracy and the new changed social order. In discussing these major changes that took place at the level of different institutions, however, we see a dearth or a lack of more information on the lives of women during that time, or on the contributions of women scholars who also talked in sociological terms during those periods. This module will try and assess how the feminists also critique the limitations of this classical literature on sociology. If you were asked the question, "Are you a feminist?" how would you choose to answer? Think about it for a few minutes. Toril Moi, a professor of literature, romance studies and theatre at Duke University in the United States, occasionally teaches an undergraduate seminar in feminist classics. In her first class with the students, she usually asks them whether they consider themselves to be feminists, and their answer is usually no. If they, or for that matter, you believe in equality, freedom and justice for women, shouldn't the answer be yes? In reality, most people associate the word feminist with a woman who is domineering, aggressive and one who hates men. This is probably the reason why even most women and quite a few men these days share the feminist views. They are still not willing to call themselves feminists. They are more comfortable with the line like, "I'm not a feminist but," to justify their beliefs. In many ways, feminists have become a bad word in popular perception. If we are to look at the idea of feminism in a deeper way, we realize that it is a term that has come out of the women's movement, international, national and local, for equality and justice. Feminist activism is not only the form of feminism, it also translates into knowledge making, scholarship, theories and of course praxis that aims at transforming social structure through word and action. Most importantly, feminism is a consciousness, a way of life. To put it simply, it is the struggle to challenge and transform patriarchies that shrink women's human capabilities and potential. Feminists have recognized the importance of grassroots movements. They have also recognized the necessity for transforming knowledge-making systems. Feminism is not only about fighting on the streets, but it is also about fighting in the home, in the classrooms, in the hope of newness. Like sociology, feminism also seeks to explain society and suggest solutions. What is sociology? To quote Peter Berger, "The excitement of sociology lies in the fact that its perspective makes us see in a new light the very world in which we have lived all our lives." Sociology, simply put, is the study of society. Sociology is a social science that studies the social lives of people as well as collectivities like groups, institutions and societies, and our behavior as social beings, from interpersonal interactions to social processes on a global scale. Social institutions like government, economy, culture or religion affect us and we in turn affect them. Sociology unifies a number of fields: economics, political science, philosophy, law and psychology, among others, making a wide field of study. All human beings strive to make sense of the world they live in, but this does not make them sociologists. Sociology puts common sense and popular beliefs about the world to the test. It is a systematic study of society that values critical thinking and questions the place of power and inequality in the social experience. It is based on research that uses theory. Sociology is thus a scientific discipline, utilizing reason and methodology to understand the social problems the world faces through the sociological perspective. This sociological imagination, using a term given to us by the sociologist C. Wright Mills, allows us to observe our own society as if we were an insider-outsider, rather than being influenced by our own experiences and biases, and yet to be able to discover connections between a particular individual, social environment, and the wider social forces of which they form a part. The 18th and 19th century in Europe was a time of great social change on a scale never before witnessed. The Industrial Revolution led to the transformation of society from agrarian and rural to industrial and urban based. Technology developed and machinery came to be used to produce goods in mass quantities. The new work opportunities in factories drew people into the city, where they began to experience a completely new way of life. It simultaneously ruined the lives of the working class, subjecting them to impossibly long hours of work in appalling conditions. There was no available way to understand the tumultuous changes being experienced by society at this time. This process of modernization was backed up by the Enlightenment value for reason and individualism. Older theological explanations, philosophical doctrines, and common sense views were falling short. With the success of the method of natural sciences, Auguste Comte, as you would know, set out the dream for sociology to be the social physics. The idea that sociology could be like physics was deeply contested and cemented in this period. The idea that sociology could provide theories of the past, present, and future, that it could explain the new social relations, became accepted. Embedded in modernist ideas of modernity, sociology went in different directions, set by three major sociologists: Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim, and Max Weber. Feminism and sociology. While we may now see gender as a recurring concept in sociology, this was not always the case. It was in fact not until the 1970s that gender took its rightful and deserved place within sociological thought. Prior to this, mainstream sociology did not see the merit of recognizing gender divisions. Sociologists studied society as if it was constituted by men alone. Women were not only invisible, but the gendered character of social life in general was not considered. When finally gender was brought into the picture, while it had been long believed that the differences between sexes was preordained by nature, feminism set out to change this impression. The concept of gender was adopted at this juncture to point out that masculinity and femininity are in fact social constructions. Gender may be understood as the hierarchical division between men and women in social institutions and social practices. As we interact on a day-to-day basis, we produce, negotiate, and sustain gender, making a social and structural phenomena. Even in the Western society, feminist perspectives are hardly universally accepted and generally left up to women, with few male contributors as either academics or students. The feminist challenge to mainstream sociology is to rethink the discipline as a whole, its content and methodology. The feminist movement's ontological challenges. Ontological assumptions are assumptions made about the nature of things and things in it. Sociologists, based on observations, made certain statements about the nature of the social universe. what is society is an ontological question. While sociological answers to this question are varied and complex, all sociologists agree that societies are organized into some social order and that all societies change. They are dynamic, not static. Within this framework, some scholars like Karl Marx argue that societies move due to conflict, and others like Emile Durkheim argue that they change when there is a consensus. While women's lives are organized in a way that makes them prone to building consensus, feminists argue that women's life experiences are often in conflict with structures. Feminists most naturally gravitate towards conflict theories of order and change rather than those of consensus. Therefore, feminists have built a critique of the social determinism inherent in, for instance, the theories of structural functionalism, whether on the division of labor or on the family. Feminists have argued that the ontological assumptions made by the determinists was based on the idea of a biological and natural division of labor between men and women, a sexual division of labor, men as breadwinners and women as homemakers. Feminists argue that social order is not maintained through consensus or through a natural ordering of nature, but through an exercise of power and control upon women's lives and opportunities. Further, feminists critique mainstream sociology for paying little attention to the role of human agency in social transformation. In a sense, then, feminist ontologies veer towards a dynamic view of social world. The feminist movement's epistemological challenges to mainstream sociology. As a sociologist, Dorothy E. Smith was interested in the impact that the feminist movement could have on the field of sociology. It gave women's interest a space in an atmosphere in which the traditionally authoritative interests in sociology were those put together by men. A step in the right direction would be to question what a sociology taken from the traditional place of women would look like. It was not enough to supplement the already established sociology to include previously excluded sociological issues relevant to women. This would only make the current sociological procedure stronger and turn women's interests into an addendum. The problem was twofold. The way sociology was thought was itself a problem. Its theories, methodologies, and paradigms were all built into an all-male universe, and even the women in this field were looking within this very sociology. The way in which a social and political structure was seen as relevant, as well as how subject matters were divided in sociology, were determined by men. Thinking within these limiting paradigms led to disjunction between how women saw and understood the world and their ability to explain it. The second problem was that men and women lived in what seemed like two separate worlds, and the knowledge and experience of each group was not accorded the same importance. The world as it was understood and experienced by men is superior to that of women. Both these problems are interlinked. It is the superiority of male experience that imposes the concepts and terms through which women are then forced to understand their experience, leading to women's alienation from their experience. As long as these conditions persist, women will remain in oppressive situation. It has become clear that if a lasting change is to be made, an alteration in the subject matter of sociology is not enough. This change can be brought about only by introducing new ways of understanding our experience. Feminism and classical sociology. Society was basically an all-male world, and this male-stream society was never questioned by sociologists. It was only in the 1970s that the gendered character of society was acknowledged by sociology. Part of this realization meant admitting that such a perspective rendered women either altogether invisible or natural. On the rare occasion, she was considered sociologically. Feminism in the 1970s sought to change this male-centric worldview, where in the past it was assumed that the differences between men and women came from nature. Feminists began using the concept of gender in order to demonstrate what we understood as masculinity and femininity was in fact a social construction, drawing attention to the hierarchy that exists between men and women and society. The changes that took place in the 19th century when sociology was born probably had a profound impact on family life and relations between men and women. These changes, however, were not of any concern to the founding fathers of sociology, despite the interest of writers like J.S. Mill and Charlotte Perkins Gilman debating and challenging the norm that a woman's place was in the household, something they called the women's question at the time. While gender was not a topic of discussion for the first sociologists, their assumptions about gender are worth exploring because that is what later spurred the feminist analysis of sociology. Critiquing the masters. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx did not have much to say regarding gender, and yet his ideas have been popular among feminist thinkers who use his analysis to further their cause. Marx was interested in class, and he identified two main classes in society: the bourgeoisie, who were the capitalists, and the proletariat, who were the workers. In theory, these classes did not have a sex, but it clear through his writing that he saw both classes as solely male. Women were invisible, they were absent from the labor market, and the women they did within the domestic sphere was taken for granted. Marx seemed to have believed that while the man was working in the factory, it was women's work to feed, clothe, and look after any other of his needs. In addition, the working class was required to reproduce in order to create the new generation of factory workers. What Karl Marx failed to see was that the work of maintaining a home and looking after offspring itself requires somebody's labor, generally a woman's. Marx believed that his solution for society in general would also solve the problem of women's inequality. For men and women to be equal, he said, private property would need to be abolished in favor of a socialist society with its basis in equality. In other words, class equality would come first, followed by equality between men and women. Friedrich Engels, who collaborated with Marx, had a little more to say about women and their place in society, especially in the book The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State. This was published in 1884 by Engels after Marx's death, but was based on Marx's notes, primarily those on the work of American anthropologist Louis Henry Morgan in his own book. He believed that at some point in the past, men and women were different but equal, even though the division of labor that made men the earning members and women the homemakers had always existed. To Engels, descent in human societies was traced through the female line, which he called mother right. This meant that fathers had no right over the children. When the idea of private property developed, all this changed. Women's sexuality was now kept under control so that children could inherit from the father's support. The rise of private property, according to Engels, signaled the end of the mother right in favor of father right. Since the reason for women's oppression was found to be private property and inheritance rights, getting rid of these would end women's oppression. Engels, though he raised some questions regarding gender, still assumed that the gender differences were natural and based in biology. Emile Durkheim. French sociologist Emile Durkheim was a structural functionalist. This means that he saw human society as a complex system in which numerous functioning parts work together to ensure society's stability. Everyone had a place in society and the women's place was in the home. This was probably why Durkheim was never a favorite among modern feminists. Durkheim's first important sociological work was titled The Division of Labor in Society. As the division of labor became more elaborate in society, Durkheim believed that the roles of men and women became more and more specialized and unequal. Women filled positions that required the use of the natural and biological instincts because the mental capacities were not as well developed as that of man. This made women a better fit in domestic and aesthetic roles. Men, on the other hand, had better developmental capacities and could differentiate between the natural and the moral, which is why they were a better fit for social life. Durkheim ultimately fell prey to the biological argument that women and men are inherently different in terms of biology, and this difference extends to the social world. Then it was to women. It restrained men's sexuality, gave them a sense of security, tranquility, and mental calmness. Women did not need the calm that came from marriage, but their sexuality, to keep like everything else, was tied more biologic and was less intellectual. Durkheim did realize, however, that the monogamy had double standards where morals concerned and was more oppressive to women than it was to man. Max Weber. Max Weber came up with the concept of patriarchy, which he says is the oldest socially legitimate form of authority. In the traditional pre-capitalist societies, generally power is vested in the oldest male member, giving him the authority over all other family members, both male and female, as well as servants, slaves, and other dependents. Weber believed that other types of authority, such as the feudal system, where serfs owned allegiance to the master, all drew from the traditional arrangement of patriarchal authority. Each household had a patriarchal structure within it, which was subsumed by bigger social structures further up the social hierarchy, and within all these patriarchal structures, women were subordinate to men. Unlike angels, Weber did not see the relationship between mother and child as worthy of sociological study. To him, it was the men who linked this mother-child unity to the larger society, and thus sparking discussion around the public and private spheres, and the idea that women and children inhabit a private sphere that is included in the larger public sphere dominated by men. Weber did not have much to say about male-female relationships. He understood them as natural and biological, and therefore unworthy of sociological study. His model of power and authority he understood as male models. The household-based patriarchal structure that Weber explained was flawed and not really useful. It was not a sound basis to explain larger social structure, nor did it deal with the power play that existed in the relations between the sexes. Weber's brand of patriarchy conveys the idea that patriarchy in the past and present is natural and inevitable. Concepts like domination, power, and authority introduced by Weber would need to be extended to non-market situations in order to be of use to feminist analysis. To finally conclude, this module presents before us different viewpoints of how feminists view sociology, and not only sociology, but knowledge construction of any other discipline itself as patriarchal. They've shown how in sociology the three main so-called founding fathers, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, had in some ways invisibilized the works or invisibilized the aspirations of women during those times. They failed to give accounts of the life worlds of women and the issues of their subordination.